thank you very much for being here today for our Fellows Seminar Series, in which Dr. Atul Kumar is going to discuss belligerent but below the threshold of war, China's military strategy in the near seas. So this is a very important aspect of Chinese strategy. There is an aspect of this strategy also on the land, which we have seen in 2020 in Eastern Ladakh. But we see another feature of this strategy in China's near seas, in the South China Sea in particular, but also in the East Sea and the seas of Taiwan. So Dr. Atul Kumar will be speaking on this subject. And we have two discussants. We have Vice Admiral Shrikhande, Sudarshan Shrikhande, who has been in the naval intelligence before his retirement. And we have Sana Hashmi, who is a research scholar at the International Institute for International Affairs in Taiwan. So I think we'll start now. And how much time do you think would be ideal? Okay, so what you can do is Atul can do 20 minutes and our discussants can maybe do 15 minutes each. And we can begin the discussion now. So Atul.
So the idea for this paper basically started after the last year's mega naval exercises which Chinese Navy took all around Taiwan. So there was a lot of discussion happening on the Chinese military discourse that whether China was going to invade Taiwan. And a lot of these dates were being thrown around, 2027, 2035. So this is when I started digging into this whole issue. And the conclusions and the analysis which came up was a little bit different than what the normal discourse was. So what I found was that most of the Chinese activity was into the gray zone operations. These operations are basically non-lethal operations to alter adversaries' behavior. And they could be through multiple means, which could be from covert and sabotage operations, low-intensity cyber operations, basically all those operations in information domain, economic domain, military domain, or even in political domain, just below the war. Yeah. So this presentation will be, I'll first explain the concept. Then the second part will show the Chinese military strategy in its near seas. And to delve deep into this issue, I took two case studies of Philippines and Taiwan. And then I'll explain what kind of regional and American responses are coming on these issues. So if you look at the gray zone operations, this is like a huge spectrum between peace and war. It could be smaller, low-intensity cyber operations. It could be intelligence picking, which Russians did in Crimea. And if you move along the spectrum, the difference between lethal and non-lethal starts blurring. And it can become very intensive at some point. Now, there are reasons for this. Gray zone operations are very important if there is some sort of hesitation on the reigning power before getting into an open conflict. The power thinks it has a bit of an overmatch in the adversary, and also when it comes to a long-term approach, a slow-scale approach, it can feel that it can gain more through this gray zone operations, more through non-lethal means than getting into an open conflict. These are flexible, these are controllable, and also the escalation and de-escalation can be controlled whenever they want. So that's one reason. Now, when it comes to gray zone operations, there are 4 or 5 key methods which can be followed. One is below the threshold operations. The second is fait accompli actions. Salami slicing activities are other. Hostile cyber operations are other. And there are also multiple smaller methods which can be adopted. But what I found out that adopting gray zone operations to describe China's entire activity in its near seas what was a little bit overbearing. So I used this one component, one method, which is called below the threshold operations, to explain Chinese actions in its near seas. Some of the features of these below the threshold is sustained pressure campaign. So what Chinese have done is they have put sustained pressure campaigns on all its smaller neighbors, especially the maritime neighbors in Philippines, Taiwan, or even the other ones. For example, they did so much like activity around Brunei that Brunei has completely gone silent. Second is, these coercive means are not basically to provoke a conflict. They are actually going to wear down the adversary. And the intention of the Chinese government is to show so much power, to flaunt so much power, that the adversary thinks that getting into a conflict is basically useless. I mean, they don't have any chance to stand up before Chinese. And finally, there is an ancient concept in China which is called winning without fighting. So this BTT ops are very, very much into that subduing adversary without open conflict. Now, when I talk about China's maritime strategy, this picture is a little bit of representative of what Chinese think. So somewhere near Malaysia, somewhere on the bottom near Malaysia, there is a shoal called James Shoal. On the southern side, that James Shoal is considered by Chinese as the southernmost limit of their territory. And in Chinese schools, especially in Chinese discourse, it is taught that the Chinese territory begins from James Shoal. So that's one of the reasons why what China has done, that they put this 9-dash line, or now it's 10-dash line, to completely cover the entire South China Sea as their own territory. This is like their national territory, so they can defend through whatever means they like. Now, if you look at the picture, there are three corners which are very important. On the top left corner is Parasil Islands, which some of they had already captured. Some they captured from Vietnam in 1970s. On the downside, these are Spratly Islands, which they started capturing from 1994 onwards, and they have built a lot of military bases and naval bases on them. And then in 2012, on the top right corner, there is a shoal called Scarborough Shoal. In 2012, they captured the Scarborough Shoal. So they have triangulated the entire South China Sea to completely capture it. And gradually, bit by bit, they have succeeded in whatever they want to do here. The second strategy is, whenever it comes to Chinese maritime behavior, they believe that East China Sea, Taiwan Strait, and South China Sea are basically interrelated maritime theaters. So action in one area can have effects over other areas as well. So whenever they build a strategy, it's basically a coherent strategy throughout these seas for a better approach. And finally, this picture has been so many times discussed in Chinese discourse. These are two island chains, which Chinese believe that they are basically like chains around Chinese aspirations. The first island chain starts from the Yonaguni Islands in Japan, covers Taiwan, and goes around Malaysia and Vietnam. And the second island chain goes through Guam and the outer Western Pacific areas. So these islands, the first island chain is very crucial for China because they have to get into Western Pacific through these islands. So what the cruciality of Taiwan is also because it is crucial part of naval territory where Americans are kind of dominant. And China wants to capture this territory to somehow push the Americans further towards second chain of islands. So when it comes to, when you look at this picture, this picture, there are multiple stakeholders when it comes to China's near seas. One is Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, Taiwan, Philippines, Japan, Vietnam, and also the American presence in the region. Now, there is a distinct division between these countries. When you look at Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei, they have mostly followed a political approach. Malaysia, at least for the last few years, has completely gone silent. Even politically also, the current premier, Anwar Ibrahim, is hardly protesting anymore. Indonesia did make some noise when the previous president was there, but right now when Prabowo has come, it has gone silent. The discourse is mostly in political domain. The military is completely silent. Brunei has completely, they don't have capabilities and also they don't have intention to challenge Chinese. So what is left is basically four countries in this region: Taiwan, Philippines, Japan, and Vietnam. Now, even Vietnam, after losing Paracel Islands, has become very less confrontational. So whatever capture they have in South China Sea, they are trying to develop infrastructure on those islands and trying to save whatever they have. But since Vietnam and Chinese economic relations are pretty heavy and the trade is very heavy, so they don't want to get into any confrontational relationship with China. But with Taiwan, Philippines, and Japan, the Chinese relations in the near seas is completely confrontational. Taiwan is basically trying to deter China from attacking. Philippines has adopted all sort of methods, confrontational, even legal. They have gone to UNCLOS. They won the case in 2016, and last year onwards, they have been threatening to go to UNCLOS again. And Japan has also been trying to, take this confrontational approach to stop Chinese incursions in its naval territories. But for this paper purposes, I only looked at Philippines and Taiwan. Now, one of the targets for these gray zone operations or the below the threshold operations is to influence the leadership, to make them come to the negotiating table, to avoid these leadership getting into external relations with the external powers, for example, US or Japan or India. So they have tried umpteen number of methods to impress these leaderships. But the problem is smaller states are far more territorial, far more stronger in their independent approach. So the more Chinese try their this bullying behavior or the confrontational behavior, the more these states are getting further away from Chinese clutches. Now, if you look at Philippines, these three presidents have been at forefront of China-Philippine clashes. So, yeah, see, this picture is Mischief Reef. This is almost like 100 kilometers from Philippines. In 1994, there was a typhoon which came. So for almost a month, Filipino Coast Guard and Filipino forces were not patrolling this area. So this reef, China built smaller buildings, claiming that the fishermen were basically getting shelter during rains and typhoons. But Philippines protested. And this went on for almost 5 years, but China refused to vacate this island, this Mischief Reef. So in 1999, what Philippines did was one of the Coast Guard cutters, BRP Sierra Madre, they deliberately rammed it on the second Thomas Shoal, and that ship has stayed there since 1999. Now, China considers this as encroachment, but the Mischief Reef it doesn't consider that encroachment. And since 1999, there has been umpteen number of claims from Chinese side that Philippines should tow this ship out of second Thomas Shoal because this is like encroachment on Chinese and international territory. But what Philippines has done is they have deployed a bunch of Marines on this ship. And gradually over the years, they have strengthened their presence there. They have also brought a lot of construction material and built this ship. So Chinese were hoping that eventually the ship will wither away and float out of the territory, but it has stayed there, and the presence has become even stronger. So in 2012, what Chinese did was they sent a lot of ships all around the Scarborough Shoal and chased out all the Filipino fishermen from the shoal. Now, in 2012, this became a big standoff, and Filipino and Chinese naval forces were almost like eye to eye to each other. So this dispute was mediated by President Obama, and both sides decided to take out their ships and leave the area completely naval-free. Filipino forces moved out of the area, and then in return, the Chinese forces, they brought more ships, more naval forces, and they completely covered the entire shoal in a cabbage strategy. So it's like layers and layers of ships, and all the access of Filipino fishermen or naval forces or Coast Guard to this shoal is completely cut. Now, this became a huge issue, and that was one of the reasons why in 2013, Philippines went to UNCLOS to the Permanent Court of Arbitration and filed a case. Now, since then onwards, from 2014 onwards, China has started building all these reefs. Whether the shoals, whether the reefs, they have built, and you can see some of the examples. In 2014, the Fiery Cross Reef looked like completely rudimentary. In 2015, you see they have started building. By 2024, there are like airports, air bases, fuel hangars, fuel dumps, hangars, everything is there. Similarly, there is another, the Mischief Reef, which in 1994 they captured. In 2024, this is like a proper base with everything, almost like a naval base. They have also put their bombers there a couple of times. Again, another reef, which is Subi Reef, is almost a highly developed area. And because of these three reefs, the Spratly Island has become almost like a bastion for Chinese Navy and Chinese Coast Guard. Now, when it comes to Philippines, since their naval capability, their military capability is very, very limited, so what they have done is they have boosted their mutual defense treaty with Americans. So enhanced defense cooperation agreement has been agreed, and Philippines has gradually started getting a lot of these weapons from Americans, even the second-hand weapons, second-hand ships, and they have started deploying all across. In fact, last year they even deployed the Typhoon missiles, which became a big issue between China and US. And the other thing is that American administration, starting from Mr. Biden, Mr. Obama, Mr. even Trump in the last administration, have completely and openly assured that any attack by Chinese forces on the Philippines will cover under the Mutual Defense Treaty. So that is a strong assurance for the Filipinos. In addition, what has happened is Philippines has started buying deterrent weapons. For example, they bought 3 batteries of BrahMos from us, and there are also discussion of buying another 9 batteries. Their radar coverage all around the coast was very low, so they have started buying radars to build these small bubbles for targeting of missiles and everything. And as I said, since last year, there are rumblings that Philippines might go again to UNCLOS to file another case against Chinese encroachments. And Philippines has been almost like a strident opposition in the region whenever it comes to China. Whether it is in code of conduct development, in any area, they have done a lot of oppositioning to China. And also it is trying to join multilaterals, Squad, even trying to join Quad and all that. Basically, because of the deliberate Chinese harassments of Filipino forces, the presidents mostly, whether it is Benigno, whether it is Rodrigo, whether it is the current one, Bongbong, they don't have any option to not take this strident opposition. So all the bilateral cooperation mechanisms have failed. And since 2024, it appears dark gray zone operations have begun against Philippines by Chinese forces. So we'll see lots of these maritime militia ships harassing Filipino forces. All the supply operations, even the flying operations are being countered. And most of these are being done by naval militia. They are already, badged, and it's like they're paid by the state. And the clash is also happening. I mean, the ramming of ships, fight between all these Coast Guard personnel, militia personnel. And if you can look at the pictures, I mean, the swarming of navies is enormous. So the situation is quite complicated when it comes to China and Philippines relations in the South China Sea. Now, the second case study is with China and Taiwan. So if you look at the relationship between China and Taiwan, the first issue, which they call Third Taiwan Crisis, which happened in 95-96 when Mr. Lee Teng-hui was the president. In 1995, China tried to fire missiles all around Taiwan. And that became a huge issue because the stock market crashed. And suddenly, all over the place, I mean, all over the region, there was the fears that China was going to attack Taiwan. So what the American government did was send 2 aircraft carriers right in the Taiwan Strait. That was taken as a humiliating experience for the Chinese, especially by the Chinese Navy. So from 1995 to 2025, in last 30 years, Chinese Navy has done huge amount of inductions of weapons, ships, naval missiles and everything. And as of today, Chinese Navy is the largest navy in the world. Now, the relationship has gone through ups and downs when it comes to China and Taiwan. And when Li Tinghui left with the Chen Shui-bian also, because he was from DPP, the relationship was not that good. But his successor, Ma Ying-jeou, he came in probably before 2015. Where is it going? Yeah. So during Ma Ying-jeou, because he was from Kuomintang Party, the ancient party of Taiwan, the relationship between China and Taiwan was good. In 2015, they two met and they had cooperative relationship. But gradually, when it became clear by end of 2015 that the lady president was going to become the next president of Taiwan, the Chinese naval incursions and Chinese naval exercises started growing up. And if you look at this table, you see before 2015, there are very rare occurrences of these naval exercises and the Coast Guard exercises happening. But since March 2015 onwards, the air ops, the naval ops have started increasing. And entire duration of the president, till 2022, they were happening twice or thrice a year. Still okay. But in 2022, August 2022, Nancy Pelosi, the US speaker, she decided to visit Taiwan. And then it became a big challenge for Chinese because they said by the visit of US speaker, the kind of equivalence was being given to China and Taiwan was being considered as a nation state. So a lot of heavy discourse was followed in China. And since then, if you look, from August 2022, the naval exercises and the harassment exercises have become completely, almost like happening every 2 to 3 months. 2023, there were like 4 or 5 exercises. In 2024, umpteen number of exercises. And the intensity has gone really heavy. And since last year, when President Lai Ching-te became the president of Taiwan, it has gotten into a next level of harassment. Because somehow it appears that China completely does not like President Lai Ching-te. Lai Ching-te gave a lot of statements when he was premier, and he has been seen as one of the strident, independence workers. He has himself said that he is one of the primary workers for Taiwanese independence. So Xi Jinping or the Chinese system does not like him at all. And that has led to a lot of exercises happening. Even in this year, if you look, these are exercises which are happening. The green is from 2022. It is very rare, happening on the Taiwan's northern side, on the southwest side. The yellow is from 2023. It's quite intense. From 2024 onwards, it's massive exercise happening in the Taiwan's east and southwest. Similarly, when it comes to air operations, you see the Chinese aircraft have started circumambulating entire Taiwan. And there used to be a median line between Taiwan and China. Gradually, China has started violating that median line, and it has also started getting into the reaction zone between that median line and Taiwanese coast. You see, the aircraft, they have been crossing median line. In 2024, it was a huge amount. And finally, last year, they conducted 2 naval exercises, Joint Sword A and Joint Sword B. These were more than 125 aircraft were used. More than 30 naval and coast guard ships were used. And these ships conducted exercises all around Taiwan. If you look at the picture, from the north to south, east, west, the whole exercise was completely circumambulating Taiwan. And this is from this month onwards. In April, I think 3 or 4 times these exercises have taken place. They call it Joint Combat Readiness Patrol. A lot of aircraft, a lot of naval ships, and the level of exercises are pretty huge. Most of this is happening because the posturing, the projection is being given to Taiwan that it doesn't have a choice. If China wants, it can take over Taiwan any day. So the impression is trying to create. Yeah, and this is happening with the consent of the top leadership. If you see, in a couple of exercises, even Xi Jinping has participated. And last year, in one of the exercises, the Chinese Coast Guard did a circumambulation exercise of Taiwan and put this official picture of a heart around Taiwan, almost like a black humor. So basically, saber rattling, shaping Taiwanese Lai Ching-ting's behavior. They're pushing him to diplomatic table, which he is not agreeing to it, and they're trying to exhaust the target state. What Taiwan has done is, and this is one of my biggest surprises so far in all my interactions with Taiwanese scholars or even the other scholars. Whenever you interact with Taiwanese scholars, they come up as very confident, as if they don't expect any attack happening on Taiwan. And the population is also largely unfazed. Because last year, when these Joint Sword B exercises were happening, if you remember the first time when the Chinese did this exercise in 95, 96, the stock market had crashed. This time, actually, stock market was increasing. In next 2 or 3 days, it increased to 10 to 15% up. Even at the society level, there was hardly any panic in the Taiwanese society. It was almost like fireworks were being placed in front of Taiwan, and they would just enjoy watching. Partially because the threat of Chinese invasion has been there for a long time, so they have gradually got conditioned to the threat. That's one. Second is they also had a lot of time to prepare for a PLA invasion. So they have had this Defense Resilience Committee, this whole of society defense approach. And also they are looking at the clashes in Ukraine and other areas. And that gives them some sort of assurance that when it comes to Chinese invasion of Taiwan, there will be two main methods which will be used. One is amphibious operations and another is urban operations. And they both can be very dogged, they can be gruesome, and it will be very difficult for Chinese to overpower this almost 23 million island Taiwan. So that's one consolation. And finally, when it comes to Taiwan, they don't have a mutual defense treaty with US, but there is another treaty which is called Taiwan Relations Act, TRA. And that act is actually a domestic American act. So as per the act, mutual defense treaty is like an automatic response, but TRA is a domestic act. So a president can decide to respond. He can also decide to not respond. But what Taiwan is saying that they are trying to prepare for at least a month of fight with Chinese, because they have the expectation that within a month, at least the US Congress will make sure that whoever is the president, they will compel him to intervene in the dispute. So, yes, sir. And also, if you look at this, when it comes to US presence, there are a lot of bases in the region. And the capability to respond in this area is quite huge. In fact, I was talking to some of the US Defense Department officials, and they were saying that during the Biden era, all these bases have gone through complete enhancements, and a lot of assets are being deployed. A lot of assets are rotated now, and the preparations are quite far ahead when you compare it to last 10 years. So this is the final one. When I look at this whole issue, and when I look at also the Chinese compulsions inside, for example, for last 2 years, they have been purging most of their senior military officers, and I think more than 20 military officers have gone, including CMC members, defense ministers, and all. So when the president is kind of purging so many senior military officers, his confidence in PLA and its capability to win a war must be very down. That's one. Second is the economic issue is also a big concern for Chinese, because economically, and especially with Trump's tariff, the Chinese economic condition is not that well. The unemployment figures they have stopped publishing. The change of all these high technology companies are also kind of hampering their employment generation in the central China. The whole Apple thing is moving out, and that is creating a lot of chaos inside the central China, basically in Hubei, Hunan areas. And also, the corruption has not gone down. So when you look at the Chinese internal situation and when you look at the regional complications, somehow I have a hunch that a Chinese invasion to Taiwan is not happening very soon. And somehow I get a little bit of solace from this, because in 2023, she met Biden, and there a lot of these dates were being thrown around, 2027 and 2035. And he was basically, irritated. He said, I never said anyone that I'm going to invade in 27 or 35. Or if anybody is planning, he didn't tell it to me. So that's. Thanks.
Thank you. I think Atul has given us a very comprehensive picture of the Chinese strategy, and as we noted, this is below the threshold, but there's always the possibility. You see that just where the threshold lies, modern technology is one aspect of it, or where the threshold also shifts. I mean, say right now, if you look at the current US-China negotiations over tariffs, you can be sure that has political consequences, you see. And the Chinese will be noting that, meaning the US-China relationship becomes more even. The Chinese will have a disincentive, to do anything with regard to Taiwan. So what we'll do now is I will request Vice Admiral Shrikhande to make his remarks, maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So Vice Admiral.
Thank you, Dr. Joshi. It's great to be here. Thank you, ORF, for the invitation to participate in this wonderful subject. And I might just clarify that I retired as a Rear Admiral, Dr. Joshi. So coming to the presentation made, I might have, as we go along, a few sort of points of minor difference. But essentially, I think we need to. I would like to suggest a different perspective on gray zone warfare or gray zone operations. First, to say that it is as old as warfare itself. There is, really speaking, nothing new about gray zone warfare except the coinage of this phrase gray zone warfare, and that's relatively recent, maybe not more than 10-15 years old. And most examples that are given on gray zone operations come from the standard sort of American analysis of gray zone operations as something that bad guys do against sort of Western interest. But I would like to suggest here that gray zone operations are very much part of the gap between two wars, which is peace. And within that, you're right in saying, showing sort of the many shades of gray, and that's where it happens. And I would like to suggest here that we should not think that gray zone is only for the bad guys, who, however we define the bad guys. Gray zone is something that is an option available to all, and indeed India has exercised that option, as have others against India, as Dr. Joshi mentioned. The other aspect is that you're right. You said that there could be lethal use of force within gray zone also, and that has happened even in the Western Pacific from time to time. It is because of accidents, etc. But they could be flashpoints. So I would suggest that we not think of gray zone with the standard sort of terminology of the little green men, as the Soviet occupation of Crimea was called in 2014 in a below the threshold of war, or what is being now called for the Chinese maritime militia, which is the little blue men. Because I think in its own way, everybody can use the measures that can be there within gray zone warfare. And like you pointed out, gray zone warfare is a very useful thing, because it is better to get one's objectives in the gray zone, short of large scale conflict or a declared or a very obvious conflict, and without going to war. The danger, I suppose, in a twist of Sun Tzu, is let's say in Pakistan's case, one is of course winning without fighting, but in Pakistan's case, very often even in the gray zone against India, it has been fighting without winning, and that's the way it sort of continues. And so outcomes are never certain. The other aspect I would like to suggest here is that for both Taiwan and Philippines currently, the situation is grim, but it is certainly more grim for Taiwan. One of the issues you might like to study further is that short of an invasion itself, because I don't think I sort of agree with you that an invasion would not be a great idea from China's perspective, because a scorched earth policy within Taiwan is not going to help China if a denuded and a impoverished Taiwan is theirs to take. I do not doubt for a moment that they may be able to take Taiwan in military operations. It might take a lot of casualties. It might impose a lot of casualties. We do not know how other countries might come to Taiwan's assistance or not. But from Taiwan's perspective, I think one of the problems that they are probably, from what I can make out, is the deep level of uncertainty about what China is doing. And you're right that in the initial months, or maybe even initial year and a half of the Ukraine war, Taiwan had a morale boost because of what the Ukrainians were doing in sort of standing up to a much larger country, much with armed forces of a much higher capability. But what is worrying them now is how easy it has been for some to sort of wash their hands off Ukraine also, and they are seeing this now in two ways. First, one I think we don't sometimes think adequately about it. At least I think so. I may be wrong on that. Is the way the Taiwanese are looking at the US-China trade negotiations that are going on in Geneva. They are intensely worried, because at one stage it seemed as if now the US had put pressure on China in a way that might have, of course, both the good and bad for Taiwan itself, because those tariffs could have hurt Taiwan also. But now they are finding that US seems to be caving in to pressure, economic pressure or counter pressures from China, and the sheer sort of haphazardness of the way the tariffs were announced and imposed. US is backing down. The other aspect is, I think, as far as I know, the mutual defense pact between Philippines and the US does not have anything equivalent of Article 5 of NATO. It says that an attack on the other will be viewed with concern, which and I may be corrected on this, but it could mean nothing at all. Not to say that Article 5 of NATO is also etched in stone, with NATO itself looking a bit fragile right now. So with Japan, on the other hand, there is such a commitment. With Taiwan also, you're right that there is no such commitment, and that is another area which worries. There was a time, I think, when the new administration came in, and when certain announcements were made before the election, in the 1 year or so before the election, that Taiwan that there might be a change in the Taiwan Relations Act in terms of something equivalent or a more ironclad assurance to Taiwan, not only words in writing about something that looked like Article 5 of NATO, but that didn't come about. And now I think Taiwanese are not so sure what might happen and whether the US will support them to the extent that might actually turn the tables, or at least hold the tide if China were to do something. But China, I think, has great leverage in terms of a blockade, or short of blockade, just to call it quarantine, because in the laws of armed conflict, a blockade means there's a condition of war that is existing. So you cannot declare a blockade. So like in 1962, they might also declare quarantine, and that means they might examine a lot of ships. And here is where I think all the pressure that you highlighted, that the Chinese have put around Taiwan in terms of the sheer number of ships they can track, the sheer number of small vessels of every description that they can deploy, the number of aircraft sorties, the number of missile firings, the number of exercises, all I think have in some ways exhausted Taiwan, but also at the same time would have, certainly tired Chinese forces themselves. But they have the size and the capacity and perhaps the urge to reunite with Taiwan that might keep them going. So with Philippines, there are certain issues that are a little different. I think we need to look a lot more carefully now at the way the Chinese are playing around in the gray zone. And you mentioned UNCLOS quite rightly. How they have changed their narrative from the 9-dash line to now the 4-SHA, that is the 4 sands strategy about uniting these 4 islands into with newer baselines and making them internal waters. If they make them internal waters first de facto, then try and establish compliance by many others who are transiting through those waters, and then claim a very large EEZ where they can now enforce many other national laws, including the Coast Guard laws that they have implemented, and enforce them. So China has created several worries in the gray zone. Firstly, they have laws. Second, they have the forces available, and third, they have neighbors who somehow in that literal, I mean, who cannot get their act together. And the skill with which the Chinese are showing their negotiating tactics, even when seemingly trying to support the code of conduct, etc., and using fissures within ASEAN itself. So what Philippines is doing is noteworthy in the sense they are building up their strength, they are building up their partnerships, and in their own small ways, they have been, as you said, reacting robustly in various places. I think Taiwan also needs to probably, be a little more robust in the physical opposition that they show and in the force buildup that they have started. However, the type of forces they need, there's a lot of dissension within Taiwan, and there are still the old guard who want a different type of navy, a different type of air power, rather than what might be more useful in with the threats that they face. So I would say, before stopping, that gray zones are a device for everybody. They are not meant for the bad guys. However, any side wants to define the bad guys. We as India, of course, are the good guys always, and gray zone is very much an option. We've used that in 1971 also within then East Pakistan. To in a variety of ways, but others will also keep using that, and I don't mind the new term being used, but I don't think we should mistake a new term for an old practice and an old measure, short of more open conflict itself. I think I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Admiral Shrikhande, you have given us a very realistic picture of the situation around in Taiwan and with regard to gray zone warfare and the importance of this. This is somehow India has never really mastered it in the way our neighbor does, but you are right that our neighbor is fighting without winning, and so it has its own problems. Now we'll have Sana Hashmi to talk to us. She's speaking to us from Taiwan, I think.
Thank you, Dr. Joshi, and it's great to be here today and have the chance to contribute to this conversation at the ORF. First off, I really commend Atul for such a timely and insightful paper. I think it's a very complex topic, and the way you have unpacked it really helps make sense of how China is using its maritime strategy, gray zone activities to shift the regional balance. Then it is definitely something that we should also be paying more attention to. Then apart from that, I also want to commend you for using Chinese sources. I think we generally tend to look at more Western sources when we specifically write on China and Chinese military strategy. So I believe it is very important for us Asian scholars to also refer to the regional sources, to talk to officials, to talk to people on the ground, so that we have more informed view on the subject. And that is absolutely one of the strengths of your paper. Then I really enjoyed reading the paper, and you do a great job in the paper of setting the stage. I do have some disagreement with your argument, and I agree with some of the points that were made by Rear Admiral Shrikhande. But then, the challenge, but I do commend you for how you portrayed a very different aspect of Chinese military strategy. And the challenge China poses in the maritime domain isn't just about one big move or military confrontation or about winning without fighting. I think it's about how Chinese are actually employing the gray zone activities and how are they becoming successful in that. So it's about a series of smaller actions that gradually push the needle in Chinese favor, whether that's militarily or diplomatically or, through gray zone activities and through the UFWD. I think it's all a part of one strategy that it has to be in Chinese favor. And what makes this so interesting and concerning at the same time is that it happens below the radar without triggering full-blown conflict. And that's exactly what makes it so effective, and specifically in the South China Sea. I would disagree with your analysis on Taiwan, but I would come to that a little later. But I do believe the two case studies that you have taken, Philippines and Taiwan, I think they're really useful in specifically also presenting what the smaller countries are trying to do and how to counter Chinese gray zone activities. They illustrate how China's gray zone tactics work, pressuring other countries with low intensity actions rather than overtly aggressive military moves. The idea is to perhaps keep things just below the threshold of war, which allows China to get away with a lot, and while others struggle to respond appropriately. But I think you also mentioned about Taiwan, that how Taiwan has been responding. So there is an understanding of what China has been doing and how these countries have to respond. And there's a lot of internationalization of what China has been doing in the South China Sea, and now about Taiwan as well. There's a lot of writing on how Taiwan is responding. But then one of the key tactics China uses it its Coast Guard. You also mentioned that in the paper. Then by turning it into a semi-military force, China is able to play pressure in contested areas under the guise of law enforcement. And I think that gives China more leeway to act without triggering a direct military response from other nations. However, as your paper also points out, this strategy isn't without limitations. And if China keeps pushing without following through, it risks undermining its credibility, which of course it doesn't care about. But then, of course, we have seen with respect to Pakistan how there has been so much disinformation about the credibility of its military equipment that Pakistan has been using, as in it's a totally different game altogether on the Chinese news platform. So now we are already starting to see signs of pushback from smaller countries. So I think there is this a campaign of disinformation, gray zone activities, everything. So I do believe that specifically Philippines and Taiwan are such good examples of seeing what these countries are doing and how they are responding to it. And I think this is where we could also learn from Taiwan and Philippines. And then these smaller states are also responding by building their own defense capabilities, even though they're asymmetric as of now, and strengthening partnership alliances with countries such as Japan, US, Australia. And US is just not one country that these countries are relying on. If you look at it as in specifically with in Taiwan's case, there's a lot of interaction engagement that is going on to counter Chinese gray zone activities in the region. And of course, Japan and other countries are also being a victim of such activities. But Taiwan is absolutely a great example of this. Over the years, we have seen China using different tactics to try and exert pressure on Taiwan. And Taiwan's response has become more and more impressive now. And the resilience shown by Taiwan, whether in its defense planning, its stability, or its partnership with the countries in the region and beyond, it shows that these gray zone tactics have limits. there is a lot of internationalization of that. The public calm, as you already mentioned, in the face of military drills and Chinese rhetoric is a reminder that resilience is just not about military might, but also about strategic planning and societal cohesion. And, the whole of society, resilience is something that we keep talking about in Taiwan. And I think it all primarily started with the drills after Pelosi's visit. And then that was my first ever time when I was in Taiwan, and I saw that there was essentially a blockade in the Taiwan Strait. I was a little panicky, but when I saw people being so normal, as in they weren't even talking about it, people were going about their lives normally. So I think that was something that I noticed, that it's a part of their daily life, it's a part of their routine, so it doesn't really impact them as much. This is a threat that they have been living under for decades. So even when the drills happen, its life just goes on. No one is really scared. But I do believe the situation is changing in terms of how the government is responding and what the government is thinking. But of course, when we talk about the people, it's a totally different thing altogether. But China does face significant challenges on the internal front as well. And I think we have to also talk about it when we talk about gray zone activities. The economic slowdown, internal corruption, military issues, the purges. It also means that China cannot afford to escalate things too quickly, and especially when the cost could be too high. So I don't think that it's just about waging a war. It's also about what's happening at the domestic level. And as much as the gray zone strategy is about asserting control abroad, it's also about maintaining internal stability. And this dynamic is important because if internal challenges become too much, China might find it difficult to maintain this level of coercion. So I think there needs to be some balance. And this is where the internal dilemma, internal challenges come into play. And then beyond Taiwan, Chinese maritime coercion is also pushing neighboring countries to improve their defenses and cooperate more closely. Even though, as you mentioned in your paper, that how some of the claimant countries are also being silent. And this is one of the reasons why, of course, ASEAN, we have seen for decades that there is no unity within ASEAN with respect to South China Sea, with respect to China. But silently, there is definitely this idea that they have to face the Chinese. So I think the idea is just to improve their defenses and how to tackle China as a cohesive unit, even though they haven't been able to achieve that yet. And countries like the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia are definitely strengthening their Coast Guard, expanding their militaries, and engaging in joint exercises with countries such as US, Japan, and India. And take the Balikatan exercise, for example. They have become not just about the military training, but also about sending a strong signal to China that regional countries are ready to perhaps stand together if it becomes worse. No one wants a war in the Indo-Pacific. No one wants a war where Southeast Asian countries, the ASEAN region, is becoming a theater. So these shifts in regional security are also very important to consider. And of course, there's still a lot of frustration, as I mentioned, about ASEAN's processes. A COC hasn't been signed yet. It's been 2 decades. And there is no accountability for China. There is no responsibility that ASEAN is taking to make China held accountable. So countries are becoming less reliant on traditional multilateral frameworks and instead are seeking out more flexible ad hoc security arrangements. And I do believe that it's a big change when we talk about responding to the Chinese threat, specifically in the maritime domain, because I think this is where the next war is going to happen vis-a-vis China. But one that also highlights how urgent these threats are and how quickly the regional security architecture is evolving. So the bottom line here is that Chinese gray zone strategy works only as long as there is no resistance, there is no serious resistance. But now we are seeing more resistance, whether through stronger defenses or partnership. And that's a critical shift in the regional dynamics, I would say. It's not that China can't still exert pressure, but the environment is changing, and that's something we need to keep an eye on. And I think this paper is already published, but perhaps in the next series of paper, what you could also look at, and the paper could even be even stronger by highlighting the role of international partnership alliances more explicitly. You did mention about the US response in the paper, but then while smaller states are taking important steps to defend themselves, the role of powers like Japan, Australia, India in countering China's maritime coercion is crucial. And I think India should also be an important part of that series. And it's just not about local resistance, it's also about how these major powers are aligning with smaller states to create a more balanced security environment. And I think it would also be interesting to perhaps dig a little deeper into Chinese internal constraints that I've already talked about briefly. I think that would, looking at these domestic issues how it affects Chinese strategy could also give us a fuller picture of how its future intentions and how its future approach could be. And then another area that could be explored more is how other Southeast Asian countries such as Vietnam and Indonesia are preparing for this China threat. How are they responding in a more sincere, meaningful way? And these countries have faced similar maritime pressure, but the responses vary, of course, based on their unique security priorities, interest, and relationship with China, as well as the US. So I think expanding on that could give us a more complete view of how the region, how the individual ASEAN states are reacting. And of course, let's not forget about the long-term consequences of China's gray zone tactics. If these actions continue to undermine international norms like freedom of navigation, what happens to regional stability in the long run? Will China's influence grow unchecked? As in, of course, there is some pushback, but then I think that's a critical question for the future of international law and norms, as in the new norms have been established in the Taiwan Strait, in the South China Sea. But then what could be done to secure regional stability in the long run? I think this is something that is very important to note. And the paper could also perhaps benefit from including more on cyber and information warfare. Rear Admiral Shrikhande talked about how, and I think you talked about how it's been already taught in these schools. So the information warfare starts at a very, very early age. So understanding how these non-traditional tactics work in tandem with maritime coercion would also give us a much broader perspective on the tools that China has been using to achieve its objective. Then I think that's also important to bring into how the international organizations and informal groupings like the Quad are offering alternative ways to counterbalance Chinese maritime strategy. And I think it would be interesting to perhaps explore how these counter narratives are developing and how they could shift the balance in the future. Then I also mentioned about how I disagree with some of the points. I do broadly agree with the paper's assertion that it is not in China's interest to launch a direct conflict in the South China Sea or the East China Sea, and its current approach of coercion, incremental advances, and maritime pressure has served its objective as of now, without inviting direct confrontation. So, of course, this idea that war is not going to happen and gray zone activities are something that China is going to continue. But, when we talk about the Taiwan Strait, I believe it's a totally different ballgame altogether right now. While Chinese activities, they may still fall under the broad umbrella of deterrence, of just military intimidating these countries, they're increasingly geared towards a much larger ambition, achieving maritime supremacy and crucially preventing the loss of Taiwan. South China Sea is still a strategic interest for China, but Taiwan is a core interest. It's now about the legitimacy of Xi Jinping, is about the legitimacy of the party. So this entire idea of winning winning the narrative and winning without fighting is something that they have totally removed from the context of Taiwan. And in fact, the peaceful reunification is something that has also been not talked about when we have official statements from the Chinese side. And resorting to the force is something that we have also seen become a common occurrence in the official statements from the Chinese side. So, the window of 2027 invasion is something that people are actually taking seriously now, even in Taiwan. As in, of course, if you talk to people, the idea is that the invasion is not going to happen anytime soon. But there is some level of panic among people, and primarily because the narrative is that Lai is there, and Lai is a pro-independence politician, and he is someone who is considered as provoking China. So China might just take this opportunity for invading Taiwan. And I think this is something that we have to really take seriously. And even the nature of conversation in Taiwan is also changing. I'm not saying that it's going to happen in 2027, it's going to happen in next 10 years. But I think the idea that we cannot just take it for granted is something that has totally changed in the past few months, specifically in the past 6-7 months, and specifically after coming of Trump, and how the window of opportunity for Xi Jinping is also closing. So I think this is where I actually disagree with your analysis on Taiwan. But in the South China Sea, I would agree that gray zone tactics have proven effective, and China has built control and presence through a slow, calculated campaign. And, a new norm, which has been kind of accepted by some of the ASEAN countries, has already been established. But with Taiwan, that same playbook is evolving into something more assertive posture. So I think it's totally different from how you have projected in your paper. And the new normal across the South China Sea, Taiwan Strait, of course, it does involve heightened military intimidation, gray zone activities. I would say the approach might be similar, but the outcome might totally be very different. And the objective that Xi Jinping wants to get out of it, I think it's totally different in both the cases, in Taiwan Strait as well as the South China Sea. So in conclusion, I would say the paper absolutely adds an important layer to our understanding of China's growing role in the Indo-Pacific, specifically how it wants to achieve maritime supremacy. And its focus on gray zone tactic is a timely contribution. And it does lay the groundwork for future research on how smaller nations are navigating China's coercion in the maritime domain. So the strategy of acting just below the threshold of war is subtle, but it is still potent. And it is something that we'll need to keep in mind as the situation develops. So I think your paper is absolutely a valuable contribution to the existing literature. Thank you so much.
Invaluable perspective from Taiwan, and also the notion of looking at the internationalization, the international aspects of the Taiwanese strategy. Definitely India is very much part of it. And I wish we also had someone from the Philippines, but we don't. But except Vinya there herself. But she does different papers. She doesn't do strategic studies specific, but it would have been useful. But that's a larger subject. Maybe, not just Philippines, but also Japan, comes into the picture, which often gets ignored because the same tactics and strategy are followed in the case of Japan also. Now what we'll do is we have about half an hour in which we can discuss this with the audience here. So I welcome questions.
I'm Vinesh Sharma. I'm working as an analyst. So my basic question is that we are finding that as far as Taiwan is concerned, even to a certain extent, even Philippines also, we are finding that US credibility is at stake, because Trump is saying that, he wants to an annexation of Greenland, which is as a 51st state. So basically, does that mean that, that when you have such kind of, reckless comments coming up, then obviously China also will start thinking in those terms, that they want to have such kind of, policies with Taiwan, etc. And my second point is that, we are finding that as far as tariffs are concerned, again, US is very unpredictable on tariffs, in fact, now they are having a lot more going soft with China, and basically Taiwanese industry, TSMC, Foxconn is being impacted because of US policy. They want basically domestic manufacturing of chips to happen in Atlanta, in some of their own states. So their economy is going to be impacted. So how do you see that, evolving? Because in case if, some of these manufacturing companies, shift or imports, their imports, Taiwanese economy will be impacted, and US obviously, their relations will also on trade will also impact, accordingly, and from there to the entire, and US as such has never been reliable, as far as, its foreign policy is concerned, even on Philippines, also on Thomas Sowell, it has been a lot more transactional, even on Quad also, in case if it wants to sell submarines or it wants to have some kind of these, military equipment it has to sell, then obviously, it enters into the game. Otherwise, it simply, disappears. So how do you see that, thing in the long term? Because these things are going to be a lot more, volatile, and can't be taken at face value at this point of time. And eventually, after Trump also, we don't know what will be the global economic situation will be. So, and obviously China is trying to gain supremacy and trying to be a lot more, with such kind of things, we can also have Red Sea kind of crisis we had, which can shoot up the, prices of a lot more of shipping prices and shipping containers, etc., which can basically be a lot more, bring some kind of, recession as far as global economy is concerned. So how can we have, because putting these kind of pictures in as far as on a PowerPoint is simple, but again how will they pan out, because eventually these costs will have to be borne by the global policy, because Quad and everything is a lot more not very uncertain at this.
Myself, J.K. Sharma, I retired as Consul General of India in Birmingham. I belong to Indian Foreign Service. So my question, my friend is Dr. Atul. I'm you made a very impressive presentation. What about Senkaku Islands, which I am forgetting, are they same as East China Sea, or they are different islands where US has been flying F-16, F-17s during the time of President Obama. Madam Clinton visited there and she said openly, she went to Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. She said, everyone who has designs on these countries, read the agreements. What we have with these individual countries, special agreements. So I don't know what President Trump or Joe Biden did, but President Obama did fly F-16 just to deter China and just to send them a message that if you try to take them by force, we are here. By air, by land not be, but by sea. So what are your views on this, Dr. Atul?
Adva, I am an intern here and also I'm doing my PhD in JNU. So my question is related to Philippines and UN clause. So of course the hard power is there, the military strength is there, and the Philippines and other countries are doing in that respect. So my question is, if what is the sort of deterrence value, if any, was there with the UN clause judgment? Was there any sort of that? Also, how can other states use this as a method to sort of deter China? So, if you can shed the light on this.
The first question, obviously, half of the answer you have already given. We had the Director of National Intelligence for US in our Raisina here a month ago, and she said a very important statement. She said that US first does not mean US alone. So if Mr. Trump is saying all these statements and he's projecting a very different picture, but that does not mean that America will completely do away with the alliance structure. These alliance structures are very strong, whether it is NATO, whether it is with Japan and Korea, and there are a lot of forces deployed and a huge amount of naval assets are deployed. They can't be wished away in one night, okay? And obviously Mr. Trump is there for only 4 years. He's not there for next 40 years. So if there is too much move towards one side, the other president next one will definitely bring the balance back together. So that we can be sure on that. Same with the Taiwanese kind of defense. Yes, I mean, Mr. Trump has given some statements, controversial statements on Taiwan's defense. But that does not mean that he, deeply believes in that. And that does not mean that that represents the entire US defense system. In fact, even Taiwan has been negotiating and a lot of this back channel diplomacy has been going on. And it appears the toughest tariff negotiations are only happening between US and China. With the rest, there are reports that a lot of negotiations are in the final stages. So we'll see whatever he does. Eventually, the policies will be clear because this is pretty, small time has passed. About Senkaku Islands, yes. So Japan is very different from Taiwan and Philippines. Yeah, in the entire region. Yeah, I mean, it is a neighbor, but it's a great power. I mean, the Japanese Navy, whether the Japanese armed forces, they're pretty strong. So the equation between Chinese and Japanese forces are very different. Then again, Japan is also covered with the direct treaties, as Rear Admiral Shrikhande said, that the difference between MDT and the Japanese agreement with US is very different. In MDT, the automatic clause will not be activated. But when it comes to Japanese defense, the US will always be there. the American forces are there. American forces are in Korea also, and there has been some talk about shifting their attitude towards more into the naval defense. So I'm sure the intensity of operations may increase, but it'll always be incremental. It'll be kind of salami slicing. They will keep getting closer and closer to Senkaku, but that does not mean that it'll blow out in some major proportion. And finally, about Philippines, the deterrence value is the face loss. I mean, one of the major problems what Chinese face is international humiliation is a strict no-no for the Chinese system. So what UNCLOS and the PCA, that decision in 2016 did, was internationally made China lose face. The entire 9-dash line became an illegal concept. And that was a pretty big setback for them, regionally, internationally, and also to smaller neighbors. And that judgment also gave the smaller states a kind of tool to use against China when it comes to their bilateral disputes. So if Philippines decides to go again, this will be a huge kind of red flag for Chinese.
Jai Hind everyone. I am Praveen Kumar from University of Delhi. Sir, my question to you is that as we have discussed about the matters of the South China Sea disputes, and also it has been discussed about the interference of the US government and its military power. So why not Indian government and its military power should establish a military base with the collaboration or with the partnership of these countries like Vietnam, Taiwan and Philippines and etc. and should provide them a deal that 50% of the petroleum products would be ours and remaining the 50% of the petroleum products would be yours. And also India should take a radical move by providing them with the BrahMos missile. And this is the best time that India can prove that it is the superpower in this world. And also, as when it comes to the maritime front, Indian Navy is far capable and far dominating. There is no doubt in that. So why not Indian government and its military power take action against this matter? Thank you.
This is Vibhav Muskan from University of Delhi. My question is to Atul sir. The question basically revolves around the India's strategic calculus. Should India also adapt the elements of China's below threshold approach for its own Indian security in the Indian Ocean region? And also, does China's assertiveness in its near seas affect the India's maritime security and also affects the naval diplomacy in the Southeast Asia? Thank you.
My name is it working right? Greetings everyone, my name is Saksham Dubey and I'm pursuing English Honours from Sri Venkateshwar College. The question I'm having is just adding on to these questions which fellow mate has asked. We have seen this particular exploration project which is Videshi oil project nearby the coast of Vietnam from India, right? And as far as green zone activities is concerned, we have also seen in LOC, like in Ladakh and Siachen, not in Siachen actually, Galwan and Arunachal Pradesh as well. So as far as these two things are concerned, so should India also make a such strategy as far as these grey zone and as far as these exploration project is concerned? Do we really need it?
Good afternoon, I am Colonel Vidur, Research Fellow at the ORF. I have got two questions. One is to Ms. Sana, directly, specifically to you, that is there a worry in Taiwan that whatever rhetoric Mr. Trump is doing, so there may be a situation that whether Taiwan is left to fend for itself in a China-Taiwan scenario. And the second is with respect to that question is basically to Admiral Shrikhande and even Sana can butt in. This is with respect to, I'll say, the role of these smaller countries in Southeast Asia. If you see the way Europe has done, that they have got, for economic purposes, they have got the EU, and when there is a requirement of the military aspects come, they have got the NATO. So, the ASEAN countries, I think in last 30 odd years, they have shied away from talking about the military aspects. because of the internal differences there. And China is quite happy with it because if you see the China's relation, whether in terms of security aspects or even in the economic domain, China preferred to be on one-on-one relation with the countries rather than dealing with the alliances or with the unions of countries, I'll say. And that's what they are doing with the ASEANs. Now, if you see the size of any of the countries in East Asia, none can match China. So basically what I want to say that is there a case for having a East Asian NATO sort of things rather than completely relying on the US or the outside powers for their security requirements. Thank you.
It's Commodore Ranjit Rai from also formerly Naval Intelligence.
I'll just make 3 points. One is gray zone has been explained to you. It's in the Mahabharata also. Ashwamedha Mrityu. This wonderful chap from me asked you, India cannot do grey zone because we are a democracy. It will not be easy. Galwan was total grey zone. South China Sea, creep is grey zone. So I'll just tell you, please understand, I've been to China many times. I've been with Dr. Joshi at a conference even in Saint-Tropez, was it? He's published an article of mine when he was a thing called Wakey. So please understand China. And please, you've done a wonderful job. China moves very slowly, but very long term. So when they started the Navy, they had these chains, first line, this finished, it's gone. Now they have a closed sea strategy and an open sea strategy. So I'll clear that for you, that these chains are gone. They have clear weapons, they have clear everything, and I'm very happy with Sindoor. They'll begin to respect the Indian Navy today. We had, I think, 90 BrahMos missiles where we were. 90 BrahMos. And BrahMos has not failed once. So they know the power. Another only point I'll come to is to understand China. The 1960s, they have a very long term. We do demonetization overnight. Who thought about it? COVID, next morning, throw it. China is very clever. I've been 8 times, 9 times. I respect them. To go from our economy to $20 trillion has not been easy. So you must take everything on Taiwan. Taiwan, they are in no hurry. They are no hurry. If India was there, like he says, President Trump said, take this. They are not like that. 2027, they will get Taiwan. They are wanting to see America go down. I have no doubt about it. America cannot. In fact, I hope you read yesterday, Social Security, President Trump has said, we may have to rethink. Tariffs, they are rethinking. Everything, medical, they are rethinking. Obamacare, they are rethinking. So the nation is probably going to go a little down. The distance to America is very far away. And you must realize with Japan, they have a mutual defense treaty. They have to, and therefore they can station troops. With Taiwan, there is no treaty. They will assist them in defense. So they cannot put troops on Taiwan. The day they put troops on Taiwan, China will reverse. So please think of it as long term. To understand 1962, because I'm that age, I saw it, I mean, a little bit of it, that they came to Tezpur. If they had come to Tezpur, you should have understood what they want. We didn't. Long story. Today, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar has forgotten about Aksai-Chin. We are not talking about Aksai-Chin because we started calling Indo-Tibetan border Indian journalists. Sir, you included writing Indo-China border. We had claims on Tibet, encouraged by America, but we ourselves started calling it Indo-China border. Therefore, where was Tibet? China saw this. I have gone to China and I talk like this in China. Because I was with them for 4 years in Singapore. I've been to China. I speak a little bit of Chinese. So you must understand, everything that you think of is going to be long term. Even the Sindoor, they are going to analyze amazingly. Because when I was in China after I must tell you this because it's very important. I was there were Chinese scholars also, Pakistani scholars also. When Balakot was hit, you can quote me, the three chiefs went to the Prime Minister and said, "Hamari bezati ho gayi hai." They immediately consult China. And also their ambassador consulted America, said, "We have to do something. They have hit us. Now Sindoor is still emerging. What do? They got an answer, do not cross the border, but do anything." On Sunday morning, one day after Balakot, the lady who was the controller saw 20 targets. 20 targets. And by the time she could activate the Indian Air Force fully, we shot down an old helicopter with 7 people, another attack. So I'm just trying to say, think about all this. You have done a great coverage, beautiful thing. But we have to think of China in terms of very long term and tremendous strategy. They will analyze Sindhu. If there are direct flights to Aikau, I will go tomorrow.
Thank you.
And present me Sindhu.
Thank you, Ranjit. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to reverse the order. I'll have Sana and I'll have Admiral Shrikhande, and then you can have the last word. So Sana, given the time, maybe about 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for your question about if people in Taiwan are worried and the government is worried about Trump. And then we always have to see what Trump is saying and what he's doing. I think there's a lot of weightage on what he says. There's definitely a lot of difference, as in there is still strategic ambiguity when it comes to US policy towards Taiwan, if it is going to come to Taiwan's defense. But then what we also have to understand that there is bipartisan support for Taiwan in the US. And also, as in no matter what he's doing, he's saying as in Taiwan is a very important interest for the US as well. And if the US allows China to take over Taiwan, that is actually losing the entire essence of Make America Great Again. I've actually written about it. That's actually Trump making China great again. So I think it's totally counterintuitive to what Trump has been trying to do. So definitely Taiwan has been an important interest. It is going to be an important interest for the US. And then apart from that, as in, I don't see that there is any worry with respect to Trump, because in fact, when Biden won, there was a little sadness in Taiwan because the interaction, the level of engagement was actually upgraded during Donald Trump administration, first administration. We saw the visit of first senior official to Taiwan was during Trump administration in the last 40 years. There was continuity in Biden administration, but we also have to understand, we also have to see that was started by Trump administration. And if you look at, State Secretary, Defense Secretary, they all have been very, very pro-Taiwan. And we have seen that how they have been also playing an important role in shaping Trump foreign policy, defense policy. So I don't think that leadership in Taiwan is worried about that. There are still a lot of parliamentary senators visits that have been happening from the US side. Taiwanese officials have also been going to the US. So I don't really see any worry from Taiwan side. And, there has also been this recognition that no matter what the US does, of course, they'll be supporting us, but they're not going to fight for us. So this idea that we have to be self-sufficient, at least to some level, we have to develop our asymmetric defense capabilities, very much recognized in Taiwan. But the problem right now is that in the parliament, the majority is from the opposition, and how they're freezing the funds, how they're becoming a problem when it comes to defense capabilities in Taiwan. So I think domestic politics is something that is becoming a bigger irritant than Trump right now. But I do not really see Trump abandoning Taiwan or surrendering Taiwan. As Atul also mentioned about Tulsi Gabbard's comment that America first doesn't mean America is going to be isolated, or this is not about isolation as foreign policy. So absolutely, I don't see that there is any worry with respect to Trump being there. As in, they're very confident that no matter what, they will have some sort of assistance, some sort of support from the US. And, due to strategic ambiguity, no one has any idea what kind of support it is going to be. And I think even US doesn't know. I think what China does and how it invade Taiwan is something that is going to shape the US response and policy. Then I think I also want to answer that question about East Asian NATO. A lot of countries have different approaches and policies and interests with respect to China. And I think the consensus is that no country, specifically in this part of the region, wants to form a coalition against China. And there is already East Asia Summit, there are already institutions, there are already groupings that are focused on security. I think when we talk about smaller states in the region, Indo-Pacific, the idea is to perhaps include China, to deter China, but all-out war is something that perhaps they do not really foresee them doing. And I also want to talk about, briefly touch upon I think a student asked a question about why India is not establishing military bases. As in, India has been doing a lot with respect to strengthening its own military capabilities, but also military maritime cooperation is something that we have been seeing. As in, India was the first country perhaps to come up with joint statement with Malaysia and Indonesia, maritime cooperation. So India has been also conducting a lot of maritime exercising with countries in the region. But, establishing bases is just not about India. It's also about these countries and their interest and their relationship with China. We also have to keep that in mind. India is not a revisionist power. India is a status quo power. So I think this is something, when we talk about taking such bold moves, we also have to see what is India's policy. And India's policy is just to protect its interest, safeguard its territory, and nothing beyond that. And then I don't see India as anti-China. India is just trying to protect its interests. So I think when we talk about suggesting what the Indian government should do, we have to be a little realistic and practical. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll firstly, for Dr. Atul Kumar, all the very best for further explorations you do carrying this paper and various other themes further. So I look forward to further output from you with great pleasure and with a lot of learning within it for me. On the ASEAN thing, just from what Dr. Hashmi was mentioning, a little more to it is that ASEAN will find it difficult because firstly, it is a grouping that began, to proceed gingerly around a lot of issues, and to really look at easier trade between that bloc. The other aspect is that ASEAN really consists of two or three, two sets of countries in there. One that is economically weak but militarily more aligned to China, and the others are economically stronger and less military aligned or not aligned with China in terms of hardware, less so in terms of training, and none of them are offering sort of bases and places to China. So China has got leverage with ASEAN, and ASEAN as a group has much lesser leverage with China, and they ensure that the internal fissures will continue to be there. The other aspect is that they have the ASEAN defense ministers meetings every year. They also have the ADMM plus. It's also the reality is that it's a talk shop, which actually doesn't talk about a lot of things and talks about some very, very safe themes. So unless that is going to change, and I don't see that changing, perhaps from ASEAN's point of view, there is no need to change that. They can also, keep kicking the can down the road, except that the foot that steps on the can from time to time and kicks it in one direction or the other is Beijing's foot. And that is something that ASEAN knows, but they cannot do much about it. I would also like to mention, because this keeps coming up very often, is that this aspect of losing face as a uniquely Chinese or a predominantly Chinese or even Oriental characteristic is perhaps a bit faulty, because losing face in diplomacy, in statecraft, is a universal phenomenon. There are various ways of doing that. I agree that the Chinese language has specific terms for it, but I would argue that so does India. In Hindi we call naak kat gai, comes from Ramayana and Kaikai. So losing face in statecraft is something that happens from time to time to all countries. People may feel bad about it, they retaliate against it or something. Because why I'm trying to bring this out is that if losing face is such a Chinese vulnerability, how come there are not too many examples of people having taken advantage of this vulnerability and made them lose more face? So that is that is something that we need to sort of think about. So I don't think we should put too fine a point on it, but I've written about it coincidentally for ORF itself several years ago on some of these Chinese aspects. So that is something to think about. In terms of places and bases, I agree with what Dr. Hashmi was saying, is that firstly, you have to be invited. Second, that the moment you do that, you land up into, various other problems and, needlessly attract attention and create internal domestic problems for various countries, which might, permit us to have a base. So yes, we have adequate reach. We have a lot of maritime partnerships. We have, as she rightly said, taken the initiative in many of the maritime partnerships, to which others have come and, created separate and new initiatives. So there are a lot of issues, a lot of such plans going on. And I think Indian maritime engagement and India's maritime support, especially now through the Quad, is something that is gathering steam, and it should help all of them together while giving, India more weightage within the Indo-Pacific and along the ASEAN issue. And here is somewhere where I think Indonesia matters a lot, and we also need to think of newer ways, deeper ways to engage with Taiwan itself, as we are doing with Philippines. How that is to come, there are issues there. I agree with that, but those are I think worth exploring also. Thank you very much.
Atul, you have the last word.
A lot of aspects has been cleared by both speakers. I'll just add this. Look, it's not only maritime partnerships, we are also selling a lot of weapons to these countries. For example, we have sold a lot of BrahMos missiles to Philippines. We are in the final round of doing that with Vietnam, and we also had discussions with Indonesia. Not only that, we have opened a lot of line of credit to Vietnam to buy smaller naval craft, air defense weapons, and a lot of these things. So gradually what is happening is that this entire region is also coming up as a big arms market for us. And since the arms industry in India is growing pretty fast and with the quality is also good, so I have a hunch that eventually our role in the arms rearmament of the entire East Asia and also the Southeast Asia is going to be pretty big. That's it.
I think we are at the end of this fellows seminar. We have really looked at this subject with great depth, and as I said, I wish we had the time that we could have covered Japan and Philippines, but I think the nuances, our speakers have brought out the nuances of the difference between, and I think you've spoken about the differences in the fact that Japan is a major power. It has the most powerful navy in the region next to the United States. So as far as India is concerned, I think we are right now quite busy looking after our own region. I don't think we have the capacity to go elsewhere. Our defense budget has been declining in the last 3 years, so relative to our GDP. So our ambitions are not that high. Our ambitions relate to really the Indian Ocean and the self-protection. As we can see, we also have major security challenges. When we have a hostile neighbor right out here, we can't go around fishing in the South China Sea. That will be a but I'm just saying that we, unlike many other nations, we actually have real live challenges in our own neighborhood. In 2020, we had East Ladakh problem. In 2025, we have had the Pahalgam issue. So right now, our forces are very busy with the real challenges, not just future challenges, but real challenges, existing challenges. So, but in any case, it's important to study what Dr. Atul Kumar has brought out of the region, because there, as I said, there are similarities in strategy. There are similarities in strategy. What you see in Aksai, what is there used in Aksai Chin, and what was used in the South China Sea. The Japanese, I had gone to the Japanese Foreign Office and they had given me a diagram which showed that up to 2008, there had been no naval intrusions in the Senkaku Islands. No, none. Suddenly, they spike. And they have been spiking since. So the Chinese are the kind of people who bide their time, you see. They bide their time, number one, and they shift goalposts. That's the other thing. That is that today they can say one thing, tomorrow they can say another thing, justify it to themselves. But in any case, I would request all of you to give an applause to our speaker and our thanks to our discussants also. I think the applause is for you also, Admiral Shrikhande and Sana. And now I bring this meeting to a close.